Listen, not as a follower, not as someone searching for validation, but as someone who has quietly noticed something shift inside themselves. Because that shift didn't happen loudly. Did it? It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't announced. There was no big moment where the world stopped and handed you a title. It was subtle, almost unnoticeable at first. A pause in your reactions, a silence where anxiety used to live, a strange clarity in situations that once confused you. And, if you're being honest, you felt it before you could explain it. That quiet internal click, not excitement, not rage, not ego, just awareness. Let me ask you something. Have you noticed how differently people respond to you lately? The pauses in conversation, the slightly longer eye contact, the subtle shift in tone when they speak to you. Not because you became louder, but because you became harder to read. And that alone unsettles people more than rebellion ever could. Here's the part most motivational videos get wrong. They'll tell you that you leveled up, that you activated, that you became some rare anomaly. But let's slow down, because what actually happened is far more grounded and far more powerful. You stopped chasing approval, quietly, gradually, without making an announcement. And when that happened, something in your behavior recalibrated. You didn't stop caring about people. You stopped needing their permission to exist as yourself. That distinction changes everything. Because when a person releases their dependency on external validation, their energy becomes unpredictable, not aggressive, not arrogant, just internally stable. Think about your past version for a second, the one who over-explained, overthought conversations at night, replayed moments in their head wondering, did I say something wrong? Did they misunderstand me? Should I have reacted differently? That version of you was emotionally available to everyone and emotionally owned by everyone. Now, you observe more than you react. You listen more than you argue. You process more than you perform. And people can feel that shift even if they can't articulate it. This is where the misunderstanding begins. Some will assume you changed. Some will assume you became distant. Some will assume you're different, but internally, something else happened. You stopped performing for environments that never truly understood you to begin with. And no, this is not about becoming cold. It's about becoming calibrated. There is a difference between isolation and internal alignment. And most people confuse the two, because a calm, self-contained person looks intimidating to those who rely on emotional noise to feel in control. Let's be honest, you didn't become stronger in comfort. You became clearer through pressure, through confusion, through silence, through moments where no one explained anything to you and you had to interpret reality on your own. That process doesn't create drama, it creates perception. And perception changes posture. You walk into rooms differently now, not with superiority, but with less psychological dependency. You're not scanning faces for approval anymore. You're not adjusting your personality to match the atmosphere. You're not mentally rehearsing how to be accepted. You're simply present and presence. When it is genuine, is deeply unsettling to environments built on performance. Here's a psychological truth most people avoid. Systems understand obedience. They understand rebellion. They even understand insecurity. But they struggle to categorize internal independence. Because independence does not react on command. It does not chase attention. It does not collapse under silence. It does not over-explain its existence. It just stabilizes. And once a person stabilizes internally, their external behavior becomes harder to predict. Not chaotic, just intentional. You speak when necessary. You stay silent when it serves clarity. You engage selectively instead of compulsively. That is not transformation for show. That is psychological maturation. Now, let's address the part your mind keeps circling. The feeling that something inside you unlocked. Not in a supernatural sense, not in some dramatic, cinematic way, but in a deeply human one. You stopped asking, "Do they understand me?" and started asking, "Do I understand myself?" That question alone reorganizes your entire mental framework. And once that shift happens, you cannot fully return to unconscious living. You can pretend, you can adapt, you can socialize, but internally, the awareness remains active. You see patterns faster. You detect inconsistencies earlier. You recognize emotional manipulation more clearly, not because you became paranoid, because you became observant. Notice the difference in your reactions now. Situations that once triggered emotional spirals now create analytical pauses. Conversations that once drained you now reveal behavioral patterns. Silence that once felt like rejection now feels like information. That is not detachment from life. That is deeper engagement with reality. And here's where the Joker metaphor becomes useful. Not as a character to imitate, but as a psychological symbol. The mask, not chaos, not madness, but the moment a person stops performing and starts observing the structure around them. Because the most misunderstood shift in human psychology is not becoming louder. It is becoming internally unshakable. Now here is where things become interesting. Because once a person becomes internally stable, their external environment begins to react differently. Not always loudly, not always directly, but subtly. You may have noticed it. The shift in how people engage with you, the slight hesitation before they speak, the way some conversations feel more cautious than they used to. Not because you became intimidating, but because you became less reactive. And in a world that runs on predictable reactions, unpredictable calm is deeply unsettling. Let me explain something most people never articulate. People don't just observe your words, they observe your patterns. Your emotional patterns, your response patterns, your approval-seeking patterns, and for a long time, you were readable, understandable, predictable, emotionally accessible in ways that made others comfortable. Not weak, just open. But pressure changes pattern. Silence changes pattern. Disappointment changes pattern. Betrayal, confusion, isolation, these experiences do something most motivational content oversimplifies. They force internal restructuring. Not for attention, not for aesthetics, for survival. Think back. There was a period where you overprocessed everything. Late night overthinking, replaying conversations, trying to understand people who never explain themselves clearly. You weren't dramatic. You were attempting coherence, and that process sharpened your perception more than you realized. At some point, without announcing it, you stopped reacting immediately. You started observing first. That single behavioral shift changes how others experience you. Because now, you don't defend every misunderstanding. You don't correct every false assumption. You don't emotionally chase every shift in tone. You pause. And that pause feels powerful to people who rely on emotional urgency to maintain control of interactions. This is where many people mislabel your evolution. They call it distance. They call it coldness. They call it detachment. But internally, something more precise is happening. You are becoming selective with your psychological energy. And that is not a personality change. That is maturity under pressure. Let me ask you something honestly. How often do you now notice patterns that you previously ignored? Small inconsistencies? Subtle tone shifts, unspoken dynamics in group settings. You're not imagining it. You're observing it. And observation, when calm and consistent, naturally increases clarity. Here's the deeper psychological layer. When you stop seeking constant validation, you also stop unconsciously performing for acceptance. That means less over-explaining, less people-pleasing, less emotional overexposure. And suddenly, the same person who was once easy to read becomes internally private, not secretive, self-contained. Now, this is where the symbolic masks idea comes in. Not deception, not manipulation, but composure. The kind of composure that doesn't reveal every internal thought in real time. You are no longer reacting to every stimulus. You are filtering, processing, choosing, and choice introduces psychological depth. Most environments are built around emotional predictability. They expect quick reactions, visible insecurity, immediate explanations, consistent emotional transparency. When those patterns reduce, people feel the shift before they understand it. They sense that something about your presence is different, not louder, not more dominant, just more grounded. And grounded individuals are difficult to categorize. You're not chasing attention, so you're not attention-driven. You're not reacting impulsively, so you're not emotionally volatile. You're not seeking approval constantly, so you're not socially dependent, which leaves others asking a silent question: what changed? The answer is rarely dramatic. You didn't become someone else. You became less performative, less externally anchored, less psychologically negotiable. You stopped outsourcing your internal stability to external reactions. And that recalibration changes how people interpret your presence. Here's something subtle but important. You are not operating on a higher frequency, in some mystical sense.